Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones
sa nagdaang 6 na taon ninyong paglilingkod at pagmamahal sa DepEd. Salamat sa pagbuo ng iba't ibang educational programs para sa ating mga learners upang masiguro na sila ay mayroong dekalidad, naabot at inklusibong pagkatuto.
Sa bawat pagtatapos, uusbong ang panibagong atong magpapatuloy ng pagpapaunlad sa edukasyon. Maligayang pagdating sa Department of Education, VP Sara Z. Duterte.
Kasama at katuwang niyo po ang buong DepEd family sa patuloy na paghahatid ng dekalidad na edukasyon sa ating bansa at sa pagtupad ng pangarap ng bawat batang Pilipino.
Salamat po, Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones, and welcome to the Department of Education, VP Secretary Sara Z. Duterte.
Sa nakalipas na 6 na taon, ikaw ang naging ilaw at haligi ng tahanan para sa lahat ng mag-aaral, para sa mga guro at para sa amin dito sa DepEd. Ngayon ay mas matatag at dekalidad na ang edukasyon para sa lahat.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones.
Sa bagong yugto ng kasaysayan ng kagawaran ng edukasyon, bukas ang pinto ng ating tahanan para sa susunod nitong ilaw at sandigan.
And welcome to the Department of Education, VP Sara Duterte.
Sa intirong Reyon Puno at si Pupuson ni Pasasalamat, nagsay kaabigan ng Imbiangyo, Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones, at Departamento ng Edukasyon.
Nabara apan ng pasambay di si Pagpupugay at DepEd Rio 1 and ka apo DepEd Secretary Madam Sara Duterte Carpio. Agbyag!
Mabuhay mula sa DepEd Region 1! Mabuhay mula sa lambak na kayanan!
Maalala ka namin bilang natatanging ina.
Matatag na sandigan.
Ikaw ay isang mapaggalingang pinuno.
Maraming salamat, Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones.
Sa aming mahal na Bise Presidente, Sara Duterte Carpio, ay buong puso ka naming tinatanggap sa Batanes,
Cagayan,
Kawayan,
City of Lagan,
Isabela, Nueva Vizcaya, Quirino,
Santiago City, Quezon City. Our dear Vice President, you are welcome here at DepEd Region 2. We love you.
Mula sa buong DepEd Region 3, buong puso po kami nagpapasalamat sa inyong mahusay na pamumuno sa nakalipas na 6 na taon. Maraming salamat, Secretary Leonor Briones. Sa ating bagong kalihim, Secretary VP Sara Duterte, asahan po ninyo ang patuloy na dedikasyon ng lahat ng mga kawani ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon dito sa Central Luzon. Welcome to DepEd Secretary VP Sara.
Salamat, Secretary Lili. Maligayang pagdating, VP Secretary Inay Sara. Mabuhay ang DepEd. Pagbati mula sa DepEd Calabarzon. Sumusuporta sa habang panahon.
mula dito sa DepEd na Maropa na binubuo ng
Occidental Mindoro,
Palatuntunan City,
Palawan, Puerto Princesa City, Rondon, Marinduque.
Isang taos-pusong pasasalamat kay DepEd Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones.
maligayang pagdating Vice President at DepEd Secretary Sara Z. Duterte.
Ng mga paaralan ng Lungsod Legazpi,
SDO Iriga City,
Secretary Kalihim Magtolis Briones.
At paghanga sa inyo.
DepEd Region 6, the home of the first 26 DepEd-run farm schools and first School Heads Academy in the country.
Salamat Ma'am Liling sa imong pagpalangga sa amon sa sulod sang 6 ka tuig.
Welcome, Vice President of the Republic of the Philippines and Secretary of the Department of Education, Honorable Sara Duterte Carpio,
DepEd Region 6,
which is the home of the champions, will surely support you.
This is Region 6, the home of the champions.
sa 7, una ang bata, permi!
Bilang sa DepEd Sigaraman Visayas, dako nga salamat Secretary Liling.
Damo na salamat, Secretary Kalihim Briones. Dayon, na DepEd Otso, Vice President, and our new DepEd Secretary, Sara Z Duterte Carpio.
Welcome to the Department of Education, Bise Duterte Carpio.
May the Lord bless you and keep you, Ma'am Liling. We love you.
Pagpasalamat, Ma'am Liling. For she's a jolly good fellow.
Malipayong pag-abot sa DepEd, Padaminday Sara.
Gikan dini sa DepEd Region 10, Samahan ng Mindanao. Ug sa atong bagong DepEd Secretary, ang among mainiton o pinagirami ang pagtitaya sa imong pag-abot sa DepEd Vice President Sara. Kami ang inyong kauban at saligan kalaman sa DepEd.
Diri sa DepEd 11, kami nagapasalamat kanimo, Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones.
Diri sa DepEd 11, malipayon mi sa imong pag-abot, VP Secretary Sara Duterte.
Diri sa DepEd 11, kanunay abante.
Mula rito sa DepEd Soc-Sargent Region,
Handog, Honorable Leonor M. Briones, DepEd, Honorable Sara Z. Duterte.
Mula sa DepEd NCR, maraming salamat, Secretary Briones. Maligayang pagdating, VP Sara Duterte. Mabuhay!
Secretary Kalihim Leonor, thank you for the transformation you brought to the department. The spirit of sulong edukadad remains in the hearts of every Cordilleran learner.
Secretary Liling, daghang kayong salamat sa imong walay puwas nga pagserbisyo. Welcome to DepEd, Vice President, Secretary Inday Sara.
Ma'am Liling, madamo gid nga salamat. VP Inday Sara Zimmerman Duterte Carpio, welcome to the Department of Education.
Sa ating mga panauhing pandangal, ang pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, Kalihim ng Edukasyon, Sara Z. Duterte, Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones, mga pangalawang kalihim, mga kawaksing kalihim, mga direktor, mga opisyal mula sa iba't ibang rehiyon sa bansa, mga panauhin, sa lahat ng kawani ng Kagawaran at mga miyembro ng media, maayong hapon kaninyong tanan.
Ngayon po ay ating isasagawa ang isang pasasalamat at pagpupugay, ang palatuntunan ng pagsasalin ng katungkulan sa Kagawaran ng edukasyon.
Upang formal na simulan ang ating programa, inaanyayahan po ang lahat na tumayo at ating ipakita ang pagiging makabayan. Sabay-sabay nating awitin ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas, ang Lupang Hinirang, sa pangunguna ng Manila Concert Choir at DepEd Central Office Choir. Susundan naman ito ng isang musical invocation sa saliw ng awiting Sandaling Pinakahihintay.
Maraming salamat po. Maaari na po tayong maupo at saksihan ang ating pasasalamat at pagpupugay sa lahat ng taong naging bahagi ng pagtataguyod ng dekalidad na edukasyon.
Mula po dito sa bulwagan ng Karunungan DepEd Complex, makakasama niyo po ang inyong lingkod, kapwa Bisaya, Nina Bianca Sanglay, Director 3 mula sa Bureau of Human Resource and Organizational Development. At makakasama ko rin ngayong hapon bilang tagapagpadaloy ng palatuntunan si
Ginoong Hamil Q. Carvajal, Master Teacher 2 mula sa Elpidio Quirino High School ng SDO Manila. At ngayong araw ay matutunghayan natin ang formal na pagsasali ng katungkulan sa panibagong administrasyon ng Kagawaran sa pangunguna ni Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones at pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas at ang bagong puno ng edukasyon, Sara Z. Duterte.
Sa nakalipas na mga taon, malaki ang naimbag ng ating mga opisyal sa pagpapaunlad sa sektor ng edukasyon at sa pagbuo ng pangarap ng bawat batang Pilipino.
Kaya naman ngayong araw at bilang pagkilala sa kanilang kontribusyon at sakripisyo sa ikauunlad ng Kagawaran sa loob ng maraming taon, panoorin po natin ang tribute sa pangunguna ng Manila Concert Choir at DepEd Central Office Choir para sa ating outgoing undersecretaries.
Na sina Undersecretary and Chief of Staff Attorney Nepomuceno Malaluan, Undersecretary for Curriculum and Instruction Diosdado San Antonio, at Undersecretary for Legal Affairs Josephine Maribohok.
Sa mga pagkakataon pong ito, inaanayahan pong tumayo sina Yusek Diosdado San Antonio at Yusek Josephine Maribohok. Bigyan po natin ng palakpakan ang ating mga Yusek sa kanilang serbisyo sa loob ng 6 na taon. Maraming salamat po, Yusek San Antonio at Yusek Josephine Maribohok. Ang pagsusumikap po ninyo ay tunay na kalikha ng isang naabot at inklusibong edukasyon.
Sa pagpapatuloy ng ating programa, ihahandog naman sa atin ng Indayog Cultural Dance Troupe mula sa Schools Division ng Ilocos Norte ang kanilang pagtatanghal na nagwagi sa indakan at yugyugan sa DepEd patimpalak sa ika-124 na anibersaryo ng Kagawaran. Panoorin po natin ito.
Ayan. Maraming salamat po sa napakaganda at napakahusay na pagtatanghal mula sa DepEd Ilocos Region. Tunay ngang mayaman ang ating kultura at dapat pa itong payabungin sa pamamagitan ng pagtuturo nito sa kabataang Pilipino.
Tama yan. At sa pagtataguyod nga ng dekalidad, naaabot at inklusibong edukasyon, nakatuwang natin ang isang ina, isang guro, at isang kalihim na buong puso at tapang na hinarap ang bawat pagsubok ng kagawaran.
At bilang pagkilala sa hindi matatawarang kontribusyon ni Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones sa sektor ng edukasyon sa nakalipas na 6 na taon, panoorin po natin ang tribute presentation na ito sa saliw ng awiting Isang Pangarap na pangunuhan ng Manila Concert Choir at DepEd Central Office Choir. Maraming salamat sa Manila Concert Choir at DepEd Central Office Choir sa napakahusay na pagtatanghal. Ang ating pagtitipon ngayong araw ay nagpapakita ng ating pagkakaisa at pag-asa para sa mas maayos na kinabukasan ng bawat Pilipinong mag-aaral. Ngayon, narito tayo upang muli nating marinig at masaksihan ang mga inisyatibang nagpaangat sa kalidad ng edukasyon ng ating bansa.
Kaya't maraming salamat po, Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones, sa inyong dedikasyon at pagsisikap sa pagpapatupad ng pangarap ng bawat batang Pilipino. Pakinggan po natin ngayon ang outgoing Secretary of the Department of Education and Professor Emeritus Leonor Magtolis Briones.
Kindly sit down, please. To quote from the good book, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us all rejoice and be glad in it." We say hello and goodbye. Hello to our beloved Secretary of Education, the Honorable Vice President Sara Z. Duterte. And to say goodbye to the former Secretary of Education. So it's an afternoon of hello and goodbye. I have thought very lengthily on what I should entitle my last address to the Department of Education. And it's a great honor to have our Secretary of Education, Inday Sara. And as we were walking down the aisle to this auditorium, and she was holding my hand, and I said to her, "Remember the first time we met, you were also holding my hand." This was when I attended the June 12th Independence Day celebration in Davao City, and she was then mayor and I was Secretary of Education, and we walked together to the plaza and she held my hand. And that is what working in government, serving the Filipino people is all about. We hold each other's hand. The title of my goodbye, I remember one of the secretaries of education, before he passed on to another dimension in his hospital bed, he made a few habilins. And unlike the usual habilins of people who are about to depart, and he was talking to his son, he did not talk about how the properties and the children and the grandchildren and the school that they owned should be administered. He was talking, and sabi nga ang title noon, it was featured in one of the newspapers, the last lecture of Secretary so-and-so. I will not mention his name because I don't have permission from the family. So I thought that I would discuss, ako talagang professor, I thought that I would share with you my thoughts on passing on the gospel of education. Why gospel? Gospel is a word which is derived from the Anglo-Saxon term, God spell, meaning a good story, a rendering of the Latin Evangelium and the Greek Evangelion, meaning good news or good telling. There has been so much moaning and groaning and screaming and shouting about what has been described as a crisis in education, particularly on learning loss in the Philippines. However, when I spoke at the ministers' meeting in London before 125 ministers of education, I said we should not only moan and weep about learning loss due to COVID, but we should also celebrate learning gains and victories where we achieve them, especially in a country like the Philippines. And so, this afternoon, it's time to share what I see, and as I handle and pass on the baton of responsibility to our Secretary of Education. What are the gains that we have achieved even as we had to do battle with COVID-19? And Cambridge University, I had a meeting with them also in London. They told us that learning loss is not a blanket term. We are compared to countries in other continents. We are compared to other continents as well in Europe and the United States and Canada and Australia. But different demographics experience loss differently. Loss is not just one definition. And we were told, your system is unique. Your solution to whatever challenges we are passing on should also recognize this. For those who are not very familiar yet with the Department of Education, but I always joke that if we have 100 million Filipinos, you have 100 million experts in education as well. We can talk about geometry, about chemistry, and nobody will argue with you. But you mention education, you mention K-12, and everyone is an expert. Right now, we have 60,428 schools. I stated this to Secretary Sara when we had our transition meeting. We had 28 million learners. We have 28 million learners. Many ministers were complaining and moaning about the fact that enrollments went down even as they fought COVID. In our case, enrollment has gone up. Before COVID, we had 27 million learners. Now we have 28 million learners. And we have the biggest, the largest bureaucracy, bigger than the military, bigger than other ministries and departments. We have 1 million personnel. And what's more, we have the largest allocation from the national budget, which is 629.8 billion pesos. One of our cabinet members used to joke that I am like a lola, hindi na mother hen, a lola hen, sitting on top of 630 billion eggs, while many others are gazing up and thinking and dreaming and making pasundot-sundot at those 620 billion eggs. Now, what were the 6-year gains in our fight for accessible, quality education, which the Constitution demands of us? One is what we describe as sulong edukalidad. The Constitution does not tell us only just to educate our children. Constitution tells us we have to provide quality education. And of course, this is a huge demand. One thing that I did as Secretary of Education and all the regional directors, the SDSs, the principals, etc., can attest to this, was I took very, very seriously the policy of regionalization. This is the empowerment of the regions from the central office to the regions where they could make decisions on their own. Each region is a little Secretary of Education office. Each head of school is a third level official. Each superintendent, each supervisor contributes to decision making. We have general rules, we have guidelines, but they must decide as quickly as possible on the many problems. In the time of COVID, you cannot wait for a circular, you cannot wait for a memorandum, you cannot wait for a letter. We text each other. And the test of many of my officials, my former officials, is that they have to choose an office which has very good signal, because I have the bad habit of calling them at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, midnight, whenever something happens affecting the different regions. A third accomplishment, it's not really an accomplishment, it was more of an activity, is our participation in the famous PISA, and this is the international assessment of 15 to 7-year-old students all over the world to see how they fare with each other on basic subjects. I had 6 to 7 predecessors from the time that PISA was established. The decision in those times was not to participate. I was the first who made the decision that we have to look in the mirror and see how we fare with the others. We had to ask the PISA mirror, PISA on the wall, who is the brightest, who is the best of us all. But this is not what PISA is all about. It's really an assessment of the capacity of our learners. Another development which we initiated with the help of international partners, and Secretary Harry is here, and I would like to suggest, and also our Secretary Sara, that if they will visit the National Educators Academy of the Philippines in Baguio, it has been thoroughly reorganized, because the most important thing, not really, I will not say the most important thing, but a very important component of education, of course, is the quality and the capacity of our teachers. My favorite scientist, he passed on when he was in his 70s. He could hardly speak, and he could only communicate through a computer. But he was perhaps the leading mathematician of his generation. And he said that wherever you stumble on a brilliant student, you can be sure there is a good teacher coaching that brilliant student. You cannot have brilliant students without excellent teachers. And so we are transforming NAIAP into an institution which will respond to the very fast-paced challenges and changes that are going on in education. Another important initiative that we undertook is, ministries of education or other agencies of government, they meet all the time, they compare notes all the time, and perhaps they also gossip all the time. But we discuss curriculum, we discuss books, we discuss toys, we discuss teaching technologies, but we hardly discuss accountability. We hardly discuss financial systems. We hardly discuss financial planning. And one major initiative that we undertook was really to take very, very good care of the huge budget that has been allocated to us. And so we have made many initiatives here, particularly in the procurement aspect of management. You cannot handle COVID if you don't have a good procurement system. You cannot find solutions. You cannot build laboratories. You cannot distribute vaccines if your system is inefficient. And if accountability is not carefully administered, then you might have a problem. Another aspect which I'm sure you already have a sampling of, and there will be more to come, is that we are always urged, go back to the basic, go to mathematics, go to science, go to engineering, go to accounting, teach your children all this, what they describe as the fundamentals. I agree very strongly that if we teach the basics of mathematics or science already in college, then it is too late. The basics of grammar, you try to teach them at university level, it is already too late. And so therefore, we must not only be good scientists, we must not only be precise in counting, in measuring, in discovering new ways of doing things, but we have to remain human as well. And we don't know how we will look like even as we prepare our learners. Perhaps 30, 50 years from now, we may have blue eyes, one blue eye and another green eye. Maybe we will look different. We're already going to be implanting chips in our brains. And right now, we are already in the fashionable habit of, designer babies. And there will be more interesting things to come. But we must remain human. We must remember our history. We must know what we are as a people. And the best way to learn about our history, about our culture, about our story is through literature, it's through music, it's through poetry. Again, we hear very often, and it is repeated in all the literature and all the newspapers about the state of education, about how poorly we treat our teachers. This was true during my mother's time, or perhaps during the time of the grandmother of our Secretary of Education now. Our teachers are our heroes. I said you cannot have a brilliant student without a really, truly great and patient teacher taking care of that student, mentoring that student. And even as we say that our teachers are underpaid, I'd like to share with you, and I have shared this also with Secretary Duterte, the movement of the salaries of our teachers since 2016, when the previous administration took over. You will see in the chart that Teacher 1 in 2016 started with 19,000. By 2022, it's already 25,000 basic. And if you go as high as master teacher and you work hard for your PhD and your master's degree and whatever it is to help promote your professional growth, you can reach as high as 62,449 a month. But we have to remember that we have regulatory bodies. It is not the Department of Education who determines salary rates Our teachers, our employees are classified according to grades, and you are paid your salary according to the grade that you are in. And so we have instances, and I can cite them to you, of engineers moving over to the Department of Education to teach mathematics, and it is good for us. We have instances of nurses, of artists moving over to the Department of Education. An economist one does not get as high as a teacher one in the Department of Education because of the regulatory rules of our regulatory agencies. And these are the Civil Service Commission and the Department of Budget and Management. Our Secretary of Education cannot just say, well, we will pay our 1 million teachers this much, because there are others who are also serving the government and serving the Filipino people. The next chart will show you, in addition to the basic salaries, and this was during the last administration, the benefits and allowances that are provided for in the 2022 budget, aside from the basic salaries. You have pera of 2,000, you have the clothing allowance, you have the mid-year bonus, you have the special hardship allowance, you have the honoraria for teaching overload. World Day Teachers Incentive was started by the immediately previous Secretary of Education. During World Teachers Day, they get 1,000. 1,000 lang, but then if you have 900,000 teachers to take care of, that is already 910 million. Year-end bonus, representation allowance, and so on. 2 pages of additional benefits, most of which were allotted to teachers. But the best news, and I'm sure our Secretary of Education will be very pleased with this, before, the salary grades of teachers were only up to teacher 3. But now, the Executive Secretary, just before he left, or not really left, before he retired from his office, approved additional grades. So a teacher does not have to wait for the person who is higher than he is to either pass on to another dimension or to go to heaven or wherever it is that he is destined for, or to retire or to get an accident, because there are now 4 additional grades which will allow a teacher, if he or she is hardworking, to move up without waiting for the next person who is above you. So from Teacher 1 to Teacher 3, this was recently approved. We now have Teacher 4, Teacher 5, Teacher 6, and Teacher 7. And a Master Teacher 5 will get range 22 at 69,000 pesos. And this is perhaps a very significant, shall we say, retirement, going away gift of the office of the President, Rodrigo Roa Duterte, whose mother was a teacher, grandmother of our Secretary of Education. We also ensured that no one is left behind. I realized, coming from one of the poorest provinces in the country, that we still have schools, one-room schools, which are located in very remote geographical areas and will not really attract those who are trying to attract votes. Maybe one room with 10 pupils, maybe a school with only 2, 3, or 4 teachers, with very, very meager facilities. And so we are addressing this, and we call it, this was initiated by the Department of Education, and we call it the last mile schools, because we were already nearing the end of our term when we made an inventory of this, what we now call last mile schools. And this was strongly supported by the President and also by our international partners. And we also ensured that those who are out of school, what my predecessor used to describe as those falling through the cracks of the educational system because they cannot make it, they have to get out, they have to work, or some have very early marriages and so on. And so we have given them a second chance to pursue education. I don't need to brief our beloved Secretary of Education on this because she herself, her city has been supporting programs for girls, programs for youth who are in prison, so that they can continue their schooling. And we have more than doubled the enrollment of out-of-school youth and reaching now 4,087,849 students. But what, and I'm very, very happy that our Secretary of Education has indicated an interest in this program. It's a very small program, we're just starting it. It's Education Futures. What will society be like 30, 50, 100 years from now? What kinds of jobs are we preparing our learners for? Do they have to take up medicine? Do they have to take up physical therapy or laboratory? When you can just strap a gadget to a person's body and you already know the results of his lab test and already you are advised to do whatever needs to be done. We have to think of what future society will be like beyond elections, beyond perhaps even our own lifetimes, so that we reduce the fear, the uncertainty that not only our students suffer from and are exposed to, but also our teachers and their parents and our communities. We call it an Education's Futures program. What society will be like? What will jobs be like? Will it mean anything to spend how many years studying medicine or engineering or physical therapy when gadgets will already have been developed to do much of the work that we usually train people for years and years? And also the impression which has been spread all over the world that the Philippines stopped education, that the Philippines closed its schools. No. And we have repeatedly cited figures, etc. When the former president declared a lockdown, this was in March. Tamang-tama, bakasyon. This was followed by 2 months of vacation, and therefore, of course, schools were closed. It was summer vacation when the lockdown occurred. And then we decided to open schools in August, and the president was not yet sure that we had a handle on COVID. And so we opened school in October. For the past 2 years, the other year we opened in October, this year we opened in September, and this coming academic school year, we will open in August. And perhaps it is important to be aware that Congress has passed a law empowering the president to determine when schools should be open. And so we also moan and groan about the quality not only of education in the Philippines, but also the quality of people we send abroad to work. If we will recall our history, the decision to allow to send Filipinos abroad to work was triggered, of course, by the massive and the huge debt crisis and the economic crisis at that time. And it's not as if education has to be blamed for the so-called menial jobs that are being done by Filipinos. But all of you know because clearly all of you here in this hall are educated. You know that we have scientists working all over the world. Believe it or not, we have a space scientist in NASA, and he is a true blue Boholano. And if you speak to him, you will know immediately that he is Boholano and that he is Visayan, and he is a scientist. During the last awarding ceremonies for the 10 outstanding young men, you have young men involved working in laboratories. You have young inventors, babae pa man din. I will not say babae pa man din, I apologize. I say a girl scientist, a girl inventor getting a TOYM award. And also, our children are winning in scientific contests. Of course, we always win in dance contests. We always win in beauty contests. We always are so lovable in singing contests. But perhaps we have not noticed that we are producing scientists ourselves, doing not mental jobs for meager salaries. And in 2018, for example, the second grant award went to Camarines National High School, a team of students from the Philippine Science High School. In 2018, we had students from the Iloilo National High School. And believe it or not, these kids discovered, each of them, asteroids, you know, all those floating things. And these were named after them. These are Filipino high school kids who are very competitive in science and who regularly win contests. In 2019, we also had from Angeles City Science High School. In 2022, we won in the CIMEO 12th Regional Congress Search for Young Scientists. We are not only good in dancing, we're very good in singing, and we're very artistic as a people, but we are also producing young scientists who we are preparing not for menial jobs. And then in Britannica's Young Shapers of the Future in 2022 from Iloilo National High School. We laugh about the accents of Visayan, but how come they're very, very good in math? But these are boring things to be told that we are winning awards left and right. And so what is more interesting to us are those Marjona Bayon jokes which is a source of so much delight, laughter, and derision. And you know, Secretary, what I did? I asked our research team to examine contests involving high school kids, young people in other countries, in Europe, in US, and Australia, and find out how these kids answer questions. One of the questions asked from a great continent, of a student from a great continent known for all the discoveries in science was, what is the animal which has a black ink on its neck toward of predators? Ang sagot ng bata from this great country of scientists and inventors, the owl. And then there was another question in another contest. The child was asked, by the way, European ito ha, who painted Mona Lisa? Ang sabi ng bata with great confidence, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio. This is in a foreign country. And people laugh about it and forget about it. But here in the Philippines, it is as if we already have a huge crisis because a child who is educated abroad does not know which highway is located in what island in the Philippines. And before the previous administration, the president himself was very upset because in one of my favorite films, of course, General Luna, one kid was asking, why is Apolinario Mabini sitting all the time? In the film, he was sitting all the time. And the president at the time was also very upset. We get very upset over entertainment shows, but we don't notice the achievements of our young people in science and in the art. You name it, we are very competitive, but perhaps it is not noticed at all. Since we don't notice it, therefore the world does not notice it also. Therefore the international agencies don't notice these matters as well. Another initiative which we also started is the Focus Secretary on the Youth. We have been taking care as much as we can for our teachers, but we have to strengthen, I believe, our youth program. And I'm very happy that you are interested also in subjects other than mathematics, engineering, or chemistry, or accounting. But they have to be taught citizenship. They have to be taught love of country. They have to be taught to defend their rights against invaders. My mother, she was also a teacher. Each June 12, when there is a parade, she would weep when she would see these young people marching. Because during World War II, of course, none of you were born during World War II, as I was born during World War II. The first defenders of our country against the foreign invaders were those who were trained in ROTC and in PMT and in citizenship, because they could be rounded up very, very fast. I know from the experience, for example, of my own province. And so I'm very, very happy that the Secretary has an interest in fostering citizenship, in fostering loyalty to the country as well to our history. And finally, for the first time, because we think from one administration to another, we think from one election to another, and base our plans on this. While other countries were having their long-term development plans as early as the 1970s, we would always plan only for 3 years in anticipation of changes in the political, the social, and the economic environment. And for the first time, we have developed a long-term plan. Because when you have a long-term plan, perhaps our fears, our nightmares, our terrors for our children, our teachers, and our communities will probably be transformed into a sense of excitement, a sense of discovery, a sense of a wonderful world, what Shakespeare describes as a brave new world waiting for our learners and waiting for the new generation. And so, as we turn over the Department of Education, Secretary of Finance used to say that DepEd has the biggest army, Secretary Sara, in the biggest army in the entire bureaucracy, bigger than the military, bigger than any of the big departments, because the Constitution says so, and we remain faithful to it. And so, even as there is much finger-pointing, even as there is much moaning and groaning, finally, I have always been told that we are only equal to Djibouti. Djibouti is an African Arab country. And I finally met the Minister of Education in London. And he made a presentation. And I was surprised. I spoke in English. He spoke in French and demanded a translator to translate his French into English. And obviously, he did not look. I was thinking of somebody in G-strings jumping up and down with feathers in his head. But you have a very urbane person. Sometimes, the kind of news we tell about ourselves, the kind of information that we give international communities and donors also are reflective of the kind of divisiveness, the kind of disunity, the kind of anger that we foster against each other. And therefore, Secretary Sara, and I have grown very fond of you. Maybe it's because of your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Maybe it's because I see you as kind and gentle and caring for children, for the young of Davao. And I believe that you will take care of the young of the Philippines. We have to start basic. Don't wait for university. Don't wait for PhD. By that time, it will be too late. And therefore, Secretary Sara, we in the Department of Education, we are not ashamed. We are not embarrassed. And we are turning over to our beloved Secretary of Education, Vice President Sara Z. Duterte, an organization which has persevered in spite of, and perhaps because of, COVID-19. An organization which developed new initiatives, new ways, and this I told you, UNESCO and UNICEF, we did not wait for you to come in and offer help because the situation is urgent. We raised funds by ourselves. We found solutions by ourselves, and we will share such experiences with the other country. And so we are turning over to you, not an institution which is a cause of embarrassment, an embarrassment which we created for ourselves. We are turning over to you an institution which has persevered, which has survived, and I am very sure will help create a great future for our learners. And so in closing, my staff is already very nervous because 20 minutes lang daw ang allowed. Namimiligro na yung aking 20 minutes. And since I'm no longer their boss, they can tell me off and send all those cards and signs and text. So I'd like to end with a quote from my favorite book. And all of you recognize this, of course. And this is from Ecclesiastes 3. Ecclesiastes was referred always in earlier versions of the Holy Book as teacher. Ecclesiastes was a teacher, but actually many also suspect that Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon. And he said, for everything there is a season, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to love, a time to hate, a time to build, a time to destroy, and I say also a time to do one's work, and also a time to move on so that others can continue. A time for every purpose under heaven. Another favorite quote, I apologize because I'm fond of quoting from the good book. Sabi ni St. Paul to Timothy, in his letter to Timothy, because he had illness, St. Paul. Sabi niya, and this is the title of the book of the biography of Quezon, Manuel Quezon, The Good Fight. Sabi niya, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And this is what we are turning over with great confidence, with great joy, and with a promise of cooperation, a promise of working together continually in the fields of education from Timothy. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And now it is the turn of our beloved Secretary of Education to accept the responsibility. Parang graduation, ano? Thank you very much. Thank you. Anong sunod? Issue po. Kuwakan mo. Okay.
Muli, maraming salamat Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones sa lahat po ng ating learning gains sa panahon man ng pandemya. Tunay nga po na nasaksihan ng buong mundo ang resilience ng Pilipino sa inyong pamumuno. Paalam man, ngunit maraming salamat.
Bigyan natin ng masigabong palakpakan ang outgoing Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones. Ipinahatid po ng mga kawani ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon ang lubos naming pasasalamat sa inyong paglilingkod sa sektor ng edukasyon, ang inyong paggabay sa pinakamalaking ahensya sa pamahalaan ang nagbigay ng magandang kinabukasan sa mga kabataang Pilipino. Maraming salamat po, Kalihim Briones.
At narito na po tayo sa pinakahihintay na bahagi ng ating palatuntunan, ang opisyal na pagsasalin ng katungkulan sa ating bagong pamunuan. Inaanyayahan po natin sa harapan ang Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones at iilang membro ng kanyang administrasyon, pati na rin po ang pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas at Kalihim ng Edukasyon, Sara Z. Duterte, para sa opisyal na pagsasalin ng tungkulin ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon.
Inaanyayahan po ang lahat na umupo at tunghayan ang pagsasalin ng tungkulin. Formal na ibibigay ng administrasyon ni Kalihim Briones sa bagong kalihim ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon at ang pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, Sara Z. Duterte. Ang watawat ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon. Ang opisyal na selyo ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon. At ang Basic Education Development Plan 2030.
Maraming salamat po.
Bigyan natin ng masigabong palakpakan ang outgoing at incoming DepEd Secretary. Maraming salamat po.
Ipinahahatid po namin muli ang lubos na pasasalamat kay Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones sa pagiging haligi at ilaw ng Kagawaran sa loob ng 6 na taon. Ang inyo pong pagsisikap ay nagbigay daan sa pagbuo ng dekalidad na edukasyon sa kabataang Pilipino saan mang bahagi ng mundo.
Gayon din, maraming salamat po sa ating pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas at Kalihim Sara Z. Duterte sa pagtanggap ng hamon na paunlarin pa ang nasimula ng nakaraang administrasyon at tiyakin na maisusulong pa ng DepEd ang napapanahon, mapagpalaya, inklusibo at dekalidad na edukasyon para sa bawat batang Pilipino.
At sa punto pong ito, upang handugan tayo ng awitin, narito si Liza Marie Neri, Teacher 3, mula sa Division Music Coordinator ng Schools Division Office of Balanga. Panoorin po natin ito.
Ang lakas maka-throwback ng ating Teacher Liza. May isang particular na programa na napapanood ako dati sa TV, yung Aawitan Kita. So, ganun yung tipuhan ng kantahan ni Teacher Liza.
Di ko naabutan yun. Anong panahon yun?
Panahon yun ng kopong-kopong. Maraming salamat, Teacher Liza. Palakpakan natin para sa isang napakahusay at napakagandang pagtatanghal.
Ngayong araw, malugod po nating sinasalubong at tinatanggap ang panibagong administrasyon na siyang mamumuno sa Kagawaran sa susunod na mga taon. At sa ating pagsalubong kay pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas at Kalihim ng Edukasyon Sara Z. Duterte, panoorin po natin ang isang tribute video sa saliw ng When You Believe mula sa Manila Concert Choir at DepEd Central Office Choir.
Bigyan po natin ng masigabong palakpakan ng kanilang pagtatanghal.
The video for Secretary Sara is being shown. We will be singing the song When You Believe. This is from the show Joseph the Dreamer. And we chose it because it contains Hebrew words. And so it's dedicated to your grandparents and your mother. And the variety of, civilizations which have shaped what we are today. So, When You Believe from Joseph the Dreamer, as we offer our tribute to Secretary Sara.
Many nights we prayed with no prophet.
Muli ang Manila Concert Choir at DepEd Central Office Choir. Kasama ang ating Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones. Sa ating panibagong kalihim at pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, Sara Zimmerman Duterte, malugod po namin kayong tinatanggap dito sa Kagawaran ng Edukasyon. Naniniwala po kami na ang kinabukasan ng bawat batang Pilipino ay nasa mabuting mga kamay. Kasama po ninyo kami sa pagtupad ng pangarap ng ating mga mag-aaral.
At sa puntong ito, upang bigyan tayo ng isang mensahe, isa pong malaking karangalan na ipakilala sa inyo, ang pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas at ang bagong puno ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon, Sara Z. Duterte.
Thank you. Please take your seats.
Assalamualaikum. Maayong hapon kaninyong tanan. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. To our Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones, ladies and gentlemen, you know, when we were discussing the Pasasalamat at Pagpupugay, the orders of Secretary Briones were that the program this afternoon should be a very happy, a joyous celebration. She wanted everyone to be happy. But surprisingly, I find myself teary-eyed with all the numbers in our program, and I do not know why. And I was thinking maybe it is because I feel a special bond with Secretary Briones, although we have not worked together, but whenever we meet in activities, she was always pleasant to me. She was never condescending with all the achievements in her professional career as compared to me, a very young 44-year-old politician. And she was always generous with her advice. So, I feel sad. Parang namimiss, kahit na hindi kami magkatrabaho, parang namimiss ko si Secretary Briones sa darating ko na trabaho. And I'm truly happy that she committed to stay on as a consultant for the Office of the Secretary of the Department of Education. Sa totoo lang, ma'am, kanina, you were worried about the time that it was taking you sa speech mo. I wasn't worried because I was actually silently cheering you on the way that you were feisty, classy with your lecture sa lahat ng mga Pilipino. Ang inaalala ko lang kanina talaga, ma'am, is yung tuhod at yung legs. Because if I were standing that long, hinubad ko na po ang heels ko. Today, we will honor the men and women of the Department of Education who stood firm and demonstrated great tenacity and courage to ensure that DepEd will be able to fulfill its mandate to the Filipino children at all times, even at the height of the onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic. Headed by Secretary Leonor Magtolis Briones, DepEd adopted and implemented bold but necessary measures to provide Filipino children accessible and quality education, ensuring that learning is unhampered and our learners are not left out, while also ensuring the economic welfare of our teachers and the non-teaching personnel working under the organization. Secretary Liling is a force, and I am humbled and honored to follow in the footsteps of a much-admired academic, public servant, social activist, and change maker. I would also like to acknowledge the equally devoted men and women, our undersecretaries and assistant secretaries, who supported Ma'am Liling in the last 6 years. Daghang salamat kaninyo. When we talk about governance and public service, we talk about dedication, commitment, integrity, and selflessness. Pinakyaw na yata ito lahat ni Secretary Liling. At nagpapasalamat kami na hindi niya ito ipinagdamot sa ating lahat. Sa kanyang pangunguna, ipinakita ni Secretary Liling kung paano natin mabibigyan ng mas makabuluhang na tulong ang sektor ng edukasyon sa pamamagitan ng pagtuon sa mga issue at mga problema ng mga kabataan at pagbibigay ng solusyon sa mga ito. Ma'am Liling, you have completed your mission, you fought the good fight, and we are all here today to celebrate the victories that you and the entire Department of Education have collected over the past 6 years of the Duterte administration. As you say, educational gains. And we were all witnesses as DepEd pushed the full implementation of the senior high school program that eventually allowed parents and students to see its significance in providing our graduates with necessary skills relevant to today's dynamic workforce. Thanks to Secretary Liling, thanks to this team, our public school teachers now earn more than their counterparts in the private sector. Indeed, you have broken a glass ceiling in Philippine education history. While the challenges emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic, Secretary Liling's light shone the brightest as a leader, an educator, and a Filipina who has a deep concern for the education sector and love of country. Secretary Liling and the whole Department of Education organization never cowered in the face of disapproval, public frustration, and pressure. When some sectors called for an academic freeze, the response was academic ease. And it was a brilliant, appropriate, and timely response, made with will and resolve and foresight that our children's learning is shielded from the adverse impacts of the pandemic. When you said, education must continue, education must never stop, it was a statement that defined the direction of DepEd under your watch. You soldiered on for the sake of the Filipino children, and the entire Department of Education followed suit. And as I take the task of being the next Secretary of the Department of Education, I take inspiration from you, from your courage, dedication, your commitment, your integrity, selflessness, and your grace. But I will also take the task with a reminder that we shall continue to find ways to improve basic education in terms of access, equity, quality, resiliency, and governance, to produce learners who can achieve their full potential as individuals who are responsible, skilled, knowledgeable, productive, and determined to achieve their dreams for themselves and for our country. We look forward to working with you as we take on the task of helping our children become our country's assets. Maraming salamat, mabuhay kayong lahat. Ako po si Inday Sara, mahalin natin ang ating mga learners, mahalin natin ang Pilipinas.
Maraming salamat po, Kalihim at pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, Sara Z. Duterte. Kasama mo po kami, ang buong Kagawaran ng Edukasyon, sa pagsasakatuparan ng mga inisyatiba ng makapaghahatid ng dekalidad na edukasyon para sa kabataang Pilipino.
Kaya naman bilang pagkilala, pasasalamat at pagpupugay sa ating mga minamahal na opisyal sa Department of Education, ihahandog ng Philippine High School for the Arts ang mga natatanging bilang para sa okasyong ito. Simulan natin sa presentasyon ng Ang Maya, isang awit na pinasikat ng ating mga batikang mga awit ng sarswela na aawitin ni Daniela Silab.
Pasalubungan natin siya ng masigabong palakpakan.
Ibon sa parang kapal
Tunghayan naman natin at pakinggan ang Carnival of Venice na isinulat para sa birtuoso sa plauta. Ito naman ay itatanghal ng fluist na si Mark Kennedy Rocas. Pasalubungan natin siya ng masigabong palakpakan. At ang sana'y wala ng wakas na aawitin at sasabayan ng sayaw. Sa mga bilang na ito, aming hinihiling na sana'y hindi magwakas ang lubos sa pagpupugay at pasasalamat para sa ikauulat ng ating mga kabataan. Nabibigyang buhay ni Rudy De Dios at Catherine San Miguel, Daniela Sila, Mark Kennedy Rocas, at Philippine High School for the Arts Director Josue Greg Zuniega. Tunghayan po natin ang pagtatanghal na ito.
Maraming salamat sa paghahandog ng musika at sayaw. Muli, that was Philippine High School for the Arts.
Sa pagtatapos po ng ating palatuntunan, malugod at maligaya po nating wini-welcome ang ating bagong kalihim at pangalawang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, Sara Zimmerman Duterte. At maraming salamat po sa inyong paglilingkod, Kalihim Leonor Magtolis Briones.
Lubos din po tayong nagpapasalamat sa lahat ng nakasama natin ngayong araw para sa pagtitipon na ito. Masidhi ang ating pag-asa na patuloy na uunlad, gaganda, maaabot at mas magiging inklusibo ang ating edukasyon sa bansa.
Panibagong mga taon at pag-asa na naman itong muli, hindi lamang sa DepEd, kundi para sa bawat isa sa atin na nagnanais tuparin at maghatid ng edukasyon sa bawat batang nangangarap.
Sa bawat batang nagsusumikap at sa bawat batang ginagawa ang lahat, makamit lamang nila ang kanilang mga pangarap.
Sama-sama po tayo, tulong-tulong po tayo, at magbayanihan po tayo. Para sa isang inklusibo at dekalidad na edukasyon.
Para sa isang magandang bukas.
Para sa bata.
At para sa bayan. Daghang salamat kaninyong tanan. Muli, ito po si Director Nina Bianca Sanglay.
Dakala salamat. Ako po si Ginoong Hamil Q. Carvajal. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat.
Inaanyayahan po natin ang ating mga panauhin na pumunta dito sa harapan para sa ating photo opportunity.